330 AD, Constantine the Great establishes Constantinople, founding it as the new capital of the Roman Empire, transforming the history of that empire, but also of the world, and this for over 1,000 years. Many emperors founded cities, but what Constantine did was build a cultural and economic powerhouse, a city associated with Christendom, a change that would both usher in the end of the Roman Empire and at the same time preserve it, depending on what your definition of the Roman Empire is. Today's podcast episode looks at a few different questions. Why did Constantine pick the site of Constantinople? How did he develop that city? And how did the emperor's new Christian identity express itself in Constantinople? Quite a lot to talk about. Let's get to it on today's episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 86, The Founding of Constantinople by Constantine the Great. Hi there, folks. Before we get started, I'm glad to be back. If you caught the last episode of the podcast, you know that I had surgery on my ACL because despite being in my mid-40s, I like to play basketball. Anyway, it's been a few weeks as I've been recovering on the couch, but I am back to recording podcasts once again. Thanks for bearing with me. While I was on the couch, I gave an interview for the Bible and Archaeology podcast, which is now available online. The interview covers my new book, Pax Romana, The Plague That Shook the Roman World, which is published by Princeton University Press, and the paperback edition is out in August of 2025, so you could pick that up. You can actually see my couch in the interview. I couldn't actually get up off the couch. Just a little bit of inside baseball if you decide to watch my interview on the Bible and Archaeology podcast. It was a really fun interview, so I encourage you to check it out. All right, so we're back in the saddle. Podcasts are hopefully going to come each week once again from now on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to today's episode. As I've talked about before, Constantine had to wrestle the empire away from numerous other emperors. He was not even a legitimate emperor when he started. Yes, he was the son of the previous emperor, but Constantine had been passed over in favor of others. And so he had to effectively stage a coup, starting in the northwest of the Roman Empire on the island of Great Britain, and then gradually take control of the west, including Rome. And then in 324 AD, Constantine defeated the last rival Roman emperor, a man named Licinius, in battle just on the Asiatic side of the Bosphorus. And when Constantine defeated Licinius, he exiled him to Thessaloniki, later had him assassinated, and Constantine was the sole ruler of a newly reunified, or we might really say newly conquered, Roman Empire. And as emperor, Constantine faced the challenge of governing a pretty sizable empire from Rome, which was increasingly geographically and culturally misaligned with the empire's what we might call Easternization. That is, the West was growing difficult to manage, communication lines and trade were beginning to break down, invasions along Rome's northern borders were wildly disproportionate in the West. And so when Constantine defeated Licinius, he decided it was time for a second capital city. And this city would need to be in the east. The site that he chose was the site of the former city of Byzantium, which was a Greek colony on the European shore of the Bosphorus. And Byzantium was not in and of itself some incredible city prior to being refounded by Constantine, but the site of Byzantium was really something. And I have to say, Constantine's choice of this site was strategically wise. It offered natural fortifications, economic opportunity. Now, just to give you a sense in your mind of what this site looks like, you have to imagine a rocky peninsula pointing to the east in an almost triangular or horn-like shape, with water to the north, to the east, and to the south, and land to the west. So already the geography of the city is very defensible, being surrounded by water. One only needs to wall off the western section of land in order to defend this city, at least by land. And the land is not flat. So the city's natural defenses were enhanced by the steep and rugged southern shoreline along the Sea of Marmara. The currents there are really swift, making it difficult for ships to assault from the south. And then the deep water harbor to the north, very friendly to ships, could easily be equipped with a chain that would block enemy ships. And that's exactly what the Emperor Leo III did in the 8th century. The depth of the water just to the north of Constantinople is about 35 meters. So this is a secure anchorage in the midst of some otherwise pretty treacherous currents. We have archaeological evidence that shows that this area was a bustling waterway as early as the 7th millennium BC. And by the way, the water around Constantinople is part of a navigable link between the Mediterranean Sea to the south and the Black Sea to the north and east. So Constantinople could very easily control a pretty critical maritime trade route. We're talking the ability to control, tax, and regulate grain from Egypt, timber and amber from the Black Sea, furs from the Slavic regions, oil and papyrus from the Eastern Mediterranean, flax from Asia Minor, even spices that came into the Mediterranean via the Silk Road and then got loaded onto Mediterranean ships were likely to travel in this direction. And Constantinople was at the center of all of that trade. So there's a lot of economic vitality in the harbor already prior to the foundations of Constantinople. And with a major city now being built in that area, Constantinople would both bring greater demand for all of these goods, but also offer Constantine and subsequent emperors greater ability to control and tax those goods. So that's looking at the ocean. What about to the west, where we have the land? Well, Constantinople was right at the nexus between the continents of Europe and Asia, and controlled a major Roman road linking the Balkans to Asia Minor. Although Constantinople was by no means near the Persian border, having a major city with such easy access to Asia would enable Constantine and future Roman emperors to better counter any threats from Persia. The land around Constantinople, both Thrace to the west and Bithynia to the east, were pretty fertile. Obviously, there was plenty of fishing in the Bosphorus and Marmara. The city could therefore feed itself even in times of reduced trade or poor harvests from Egypt. Interestingly, the hills of Constantinople, which were 7 in total, mirrored Rome and its 7 hills. Places where watchmen could watch for surprise attacks by sea or by land. And all of this was true before Constantine laid a single stone. Now, Constantine envisioned Constantinople as a grand imperial capital. It wasn't just going to be a military city or a trading hub. So in 324 AD, after defeating Licinius, he plowed a line to mark where the walls would go, and this quadrupled the size of the old site of Byzantium to about 8 square kilometers. The Byzantine historian Zosimus wrote in the early 6th century, quote, "Constantine resolved to make the city a home fit for an emperor. He surrounded it with a wall, cutting off the whole isthmus from sea to sea. He built a palace scarcely inferior to the one in Rome. He decorated the hippodrome most beautifully, incorporating the temple of the Dioscuri in it." That's Zosimus's New History. Let's talk about a few of the things that he brings up. First, the walls of Constantine. It took Constantine 6 years to build the wall. They were enhanced by his successors. They were a defining feature at the western edge of the city. There were gates along that wall, including gates on both shores. And then from the east of the wall, the city was divided into 14 regions organized around those 7 hills. If you went in to the western gates, you could actually follow a colonnaded thoroughfare all the way to the center of the city, checking out the shops and the artisan establishments as you went along the walkway. At the center of Constantinople was the Forum of Constantine. It was designed to mark the city's status as the new imperial capital. Rome had plenty of fora, and now Constantine, as the founder of Constantinople, would build a forum in his capital city. Constantine's forum was circular, about 70 meters in diameter. There were 2 monumental gates, one at the east, one at the west, and at the center stood a large column, which we today still call the Column of Constantine. It is the only part of the forum that still survives. It's 35 meters tall, made out of porphyry, a beautiful purple-colored stone. It commemorated the foundation of the city and was originally topped with a colossal statue of Constantine as Apollo. That's right. This first Christian emperor, even later in his life, in 330 AD, had himself represented with a halo of 7 rays symbolizing his divine authority as Apollo. Around the column, the forum was adorned with a variety of statues and reliefs. There were depictions of Christian saints, but also pagan gods. Constantine, like the city, was very much in transition. To the north of the forum was a senate house for the new Senate of Constantinople. Again, this was a true capital city. It didn't just have monuments, it had political institutions as well, including its own Senate. And then to the south was a fountain with statues of a dolphin, an elephant, and some nymphs frolicking in the water. Now, also mentioned by Zosimus was the hippodrome. And if the forum was a kind of political and symbolic center, the hippodrome would be a social center, a massive arena for chariot racing and public spectacles. And although the Hippodrome of Constantine was largely built by that emperor, it was actually the Emperor Septimius Severus who built a smaller hippodrome on the same site over 100 years earlier in 203 AD. But what Constantine did was take Septimius's much smaller design and add tens of thousands of seats, expanding his hippodrome to a capacity of over 100,000 spectators. It was 130 meters wide and 450 meters long, a U-shaped racetrack with the emperor's box there on the east side connected to his palace. So he didn't have to walk in the streets of Constantinople. He could just go straight into his box from his house. Now, the hippodrome wasn't just for watching races. Constantine littered the central barrier of the racetrack with treasures and monuments to showcase his wealth and his prestige. There are several that were there, as we have described in the sources. So, for example, the Serpent Column. This was a bronze column that Constantine stole from Delphi. It was dedicated to Apollo after the Greeks won the Battle of Plataea against the Persians in 479 BC. So Constantine stuck that there in the middle of his racetrack. Constantine imported sculptures from across the empire, depictions of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Augustus. Later emperors would put other objects there. So Theodosius drug an obelisk from Egypt, which, by the way, is still in Constantinople to this day. Other emperors brought other obelisks or statues from other parts of the classical world. Eventually, Constantinople suffered the fate that it inflicted on others. For example, a gilded 4-horse chariot, which used to be in the hippodrome, was stolen by crusaders in 1204 and is now seen in St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. So I guess what goes around comes around. But the artifacts that were gathered in that hippodrome, again, some by Constantine, some by subsequent emperors, really transformed it into a kind of open-air museum of Greco-Roman heritage. This was not only a venue for chariot races, but it was a kind of stage for imperial ceremonies. Constantine would hold public executions there. Even political demonstrations happened in this space. And eventually, we will probably talk about the Nika riots of 532 on this podcast. That is a ways in the future. But Constantine's hippodrome feature prominently in those riots. There were, of course, many other monumental structures in Constantinople. I don't just want to describe all of them in great detail, but public baths, libraries, large grain silos, because Constantine offered free bread rations, just like were offered in Rome, to the men who worked for him, the men who built houses, engaged in crafts. The whole point here was to attract the kinds of people that would make a city come to life. Now, I also wanted to say something about this city as a Christian city. We saw in episode 84 that Constantine converted to Christianity, although his conversion does not appear to have been instantaneous, and it appears, at least for a while, Constantine thought of Christianity in a very Roman way. Unsurprisingly, Constantine's apparent view that he owed the Christian God monumental acts of service in exchange for God's blessings towards Constantine, it's unsurprising that Constantine built many churches in Constantinople. And in those churches, he brought relics, bits and pieces of the body parts of the 12 apostles and later Christian martyrs. Many of these churches were named or at least dedicated to Christian fathers, apostles, martyrs, and so on. It was in one of the Constantinople churches where he would eventually be buried when he died in 337 AD. We'll say more, though, about Constantine's death on a future episode. In addition to monumental buildings and churches, Constantinople featured a great deal of practical infrastructure, just like the city of Rome. So the water supply of the city was secured by aqueducts, some of which are still visible to this day. There were vast cisterns for collecting rainwater. I already mentioned the grain silos, which could be stocked with imports from Egypt and other regions, allowing Constantine to pass out free bread, just like Rome. By the way, to build all of this stuff, Constantine employed thousands of men, not just as construction workers, but as various administrators and bureaucrats, scholars, artists, and craftsmen. I'll talk more about this in a future episode, but Constantine actually reorganized the Roman monetary system. Plenty of his new gold coins, the solidus, were passed around in Constantinople as wages and payments for various services. But what about the elite? Even if Rome's fortunes were rapidly declining by the 4th century AD, Rome still had its Senate and senators, men who had served in the city government for centuries, some of them coming from families that joined the Senate even back in the Roman Republic. Constantinople couldn't compete with that. So Constantine leaned into the idea of having a more fluid, open, meritocratic elite in Constantinople. The new Senate included some old Roman families, but also newcomers that Constantine appointed because of their merit. No doubt there was some tension in the elite as old and new elites were forced to work together, but Constantine made it work. One of the ways that he did this was by coming up with a variety of titles and distinctions. So we have Eusebius in the life of Constantine saying this, for example, quote, "Some received money in abundance, others goods. Some acquired posts as prefects, others senatorial rank. Some were appointed comites of the first order, others of the second, others of the third. Similarly, many thousands more shared honors as clarissimi, or with a wide range of other titles. In order to promote more persons, the emperor contrived different distinctions. That's Eusebius in his biography of Constantine. Now, there were a lot of Latin words in there, and we don't need to explain each of them in detail, but they are effectively all different kinds of administrative positions. Some indicate closeness to the emperor, like the comites, which effectively means something like follower or companion of the emperor. In the Middle Ages, this would eventually become the word count. They're effectively trusted court officials. A clarissimus is pretty similar, only this was a kind of lower rank, usually allowing somebody to enter into the Senate or maybe govern a province, which is why Constantine gave it to thousands of people. The point here was to hand out both physical goods and symbolic prestige, making Constantinople a magnet for people of various talents and abilities and ambitions. Constantine did not simply want a beautiful city, he wanted a central governing hub. So Constantine's establishment of Constantinople was a visionary move. It was strategic, it was symbolic at the same time. Rome continued to function in the West, and we'll have plenty more to say about Rome in subsequent episodes, but the founding of Constantinople in effect relocated the center of the Roman Empire. And really, this could not have happened too soon. The city had natural defenses, economic vitality, and enduring political dominance, whereas Rome had been in decline now for some time. So Constantine, despite much of his reign dealing with civil wars and religious tensions, was able to craft in Constantinople a city that endured and which carried the Roman Empire into the future, even after Rome itself fell to the barbarians. Constantinople became a city that would bridge antiquity and the medieval world, a testament to one man's ambition and foresight.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocor. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.